Firstly, welcome everyone to Raisley's 2023 Fundraising Benchmarks webinar. This is the third time we've done fundraising benchmarks, and we're so excited to have you all here today. It is our biggest benchmarks webinar yet, and also our best, because we have Martin, who I'll introduce to you in a second. But this is the most detailed analysis we've ever done of Raisley's fundraising data, and we think we've got some really great insights to share with you all today. By way of a quick introduction, my name is Tom Maitland. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Raisley. I guess I'll be emceeing the session today. Martin's the brains behind the operation. But really, we're just excited to have this session with you. We want you to come away with a bit of an understanding of 2022, looking back on the year that has been and fundraising. And then we also want to provide you with the data and the insights that you need to make informed, good fundraising decisions for 2023. A few little housekeeping things we're going to start with. We're going to use the chat today, now that it's enabled, to discuss what we're talking about. Use it to share your own experiences. I really think the chat can be one of the best parts of a webinar. So the chat is yours. What I will say is that just because of how many people we've got on today, please don't use the chat for questions, because they're totally going to get lost. So use the chat to share your experiences, your tips, your insights. Say when you find things interesting. We'd really love everyone to be an active participant today. But if you have any questions for us, then use the Q&A. And that's the little Q&A box at the bottom of your window. Everyone can see the questions, so you can actually upvote them and you can add comments to them and those kinds of things, but that just keeps it nice and structured for us. We're going to have some questions at the end of the session today. We've got about 2 hours together. I know it's a longer session. We just didn't want to rush it because we've got so much to send you. So if you do need to duck out early, that's totally fine. We're going to send a recording around later on. There's a few polls throughout the session. You can watch out for them. They should pop up in your Zoom window. And of course, yes, all of this will be recorded and shared. By way of some quick introductions, I already mentioned myself. So my name's Tom. I am the CEO and co-founder of Raisley. I've been in digital marketing, fundraising, and tech for about 10 years now. Started Raisley a little over 6 years ago. And Martin, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Martin. I've been at Raisley for probably close to around 9 months or so. And I'm the lead data scientist here. So people ask me what that involves, and just anything to do with data at Raisley. I'm excited and I'm interested to have a look at. I'm really excited for the session today, and looking forward to interesting questions and keeping an eye on the chat too.
Thanks, Martin. Martin's got an incredible experience across data science, from hobby projects to professional projects. We're very lucky to have him on the team at Raisley and helping you all out with this analysis. We hope it's interesting. Before we get any further, of course, want to acknowledge that I'm calling in today from Landstolen, from the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Raisley's team itself is all over the world and in so many places that we live and work. We live and work on stolen land. And as a company, we're certainly committed to land rights, the return of power, and reconciliation with First Nations folks. Martin, where are you calling in today from?
I'm calling in from Wongal land, which is part of the Eora Nation in Sydney, in New South Wales. Yeah, and certainly pay my acknowledgements to the traditional owners of that land.
Thanks. Well, right on. This is our session. So we have about an hour and a half of stuff to share with you, and then we've got some time at the end for questions. We're going to make sure we have a few short breaks throughout this session, so that if you do need to run and get some water, then that's totally fine. And you've got the moment to do that. We're going to start with an analysis on fundraising in 2022. We're going to talk broadly fundraising strategy for organizations for the first part. We're then going to look at peer-to-peer fundraising benchmarks and tactics to help your supporters raise more, have a short break, and then also move into trends, benchmarks, and recommendations for appeals and individual giving. We'll have some Q&A at the end. We might try to answer some questions as we go along. We'll see how we're going for time. So pop those in the Q&A. Otherwise, we've got a larger chunk of time at the end. I wanted to start with a little bit about why we do this. Raisley's mission as a B Corp and as a company that puts purpose before profit is that we want to improve the well-being of people and planet by empowering charities, so many of the folks on the call today, to grow. And that's part of our commitment to be who we are. And I think there's 3 reasons why doing this kind of work is really important. Firstly, sharing and analyzing data openly allows our collective impact as a sector to grow. I think this is one of the unique sectors where we're not competitors, we're peers. And we certainly want to make sure that as a sector, we are more effective as a group. I firmly believe that online giving is the biggest revenue opportunity for charities right now. There is so much room to grow in online giving. I've mentioned in past kind of sessions that you might have seen me talk that the gap between online giving and e-commerce is pretty large and represents a sizable opportunity for charities. We really should be at parity. And so online giving is going to continue to grow over the next decade. And to do that, we need to make sure we are optimizing our efforts and making sure we're as effective and as sophisticated as possible as a sector. And thirdly, we have a uniquely broad perspective at Raisley that many organisations don't have. We also have the capacity to do this, and many charities don't. We're very fortunate to have Martin with us. We're very fortunate to have the resources to be able to run a sophisticated benchmarking exercise like this. And so, yeah, we're really excited that we can actually do this, and we feel it's our duty to do this to the sector. So it's really important why we do this. In terms of our perspective, so the data we're sharing today is from about 7,500 campaigns over nearly 2,000 different charities. There's a really broad split of those charities. Some of them are very large, some of them are medium, some of them are very small. And so I'm sure there are folks joining today from all of those groups of people. We're trying to make these benchmarks relevant to everyone today. The strategies we're sharing, you don't necessarily need to be a very large charity to implement. Same as there might be some strategies that work really well if you are. We're looking at about 250 million in fundraising, over 2 million donors, and nearly 500,000 fundraising profiles. Martin, do you want to talk a little bit about the methodology?
Yeah, so I'm one of those, we love stats here at Raisley, and I'm one of those very, very fortunate people who gets to do their hobby for their job. So we take this very, I suppose I take this seriously and love the stats and want to get it right. And so the stuff that we've put together today, we've taken time to think about and consider what's the most helpful way to share it with the sector, and also what's the most reflective of what's happening for most organizations. So two of the things that we do, and I'll touch on these more as we go, but two of the things that we've done is some regression modeling. And so that's really to kind of tease out the signal from the noise. And so looking at all of our data together, but trying to control for some of the things that might confound, not looking at little bits of data in isolation to try and tell a story that suits us, but to try and use as much data as we can and tell the story that the data says, and show you information that might be helpful for you. The other thing that we've done is use medians, which is the sort of middle of a distribution. So 50% of the data is above that and 50% of the data is below the median. And error bars to show you the spread of data. We use that because averages can often be skewed by some outlier organizations or that kind of things. And so using the median, we usually giving something that's a bit more sensible and helpful. I'll tease that out a little bit as we go along, but yeah, we wanted to get it right and show you information that's reliable and helpful for you.
Thanks. We've tried to be as rigorous as we can here. We certainly have a bit of an aversion to just sharing simple averages or silly numbers that don't actually mean anything for you. So we've tried to be really thorough. So I'm going to start by talking about last year. 2021 was a peak year for so many organizations, and particularly in virtual peer-to-peer. And we saw growth last year in 2022, but it wasn't the same strength. I think many folks on the call probably have seen the same thing, but it really depends on what your fundraising program looks like. Certainly folks who were doing virtual peer-to-peer probably saw the impact more than folks who relied heavily on appeals. There's no question that 2022 was an interesting year for the world. Of course, we had global inflation, we had the war in Ukraine, we had a famine in Africa, and all of those things led to cost of living pressures that affected all of us, but also affected all of our donors. And so it was really a unique moment in time, unlike even other economic situations that we've had in the past. And it was really interesting and difficult to see how that affected giving. But also there was other things going on that I think it's important for us to remember, that there was really a range of compounding factors that were affecting fundraising and our industry more broadly last year. At the start of the year, Apple rolled out iOS 14, and it took quite a while for us as an industry, as well as Facebook and broadly digital advertising, to respond to that. At the same time, Facebook changed their algorithm to prioritize content discovery and distribution over content from your networks. And that meant that Facebook wasn't as strong a referral source for us. And we'll actually see that in the data a little bit later on. But of course, last year we were also coming out of pandemic restrictions and lockdowns, still very much a lot of virus around. But there was a bit of fatigue of virtual events and a very reasonable, slow restart of physical events. So we're certainly seeing those come back with a lot of strength this year. While I'm talking through these, love you to put in the chat what was a win and a lesson for your charity in 2022. If there's anything you're willing to share, I'm sure the folks on the webinar today would love to hear it. So if there was a win and a lesson for your charity last year, pop it in the chat and share it with us. We'll call out some good ones. I think, though, I don't want to start this webinar with all doom and gloom. Certainly last year was interesting and challenging, but I think we emerged from this season with new capability and new opportunity. And again, I think we have a unique perspective here. We talk to thousands, we work with thousands of charities every year. We talk to so many every day as Raisley. And we emerge from the pandemic with new capability and new opportunity. And I think there's three things there that contribute to that. Firstly, digital adoption within charities is greater than ever. I think all of the people on this webinar know more and are more sophisticated with your digital fundraising than you ever were before. I think that's true of all charities across the world. But also online fundraising continues to grow. While it certainly sped up over the course of the pandemic, we haven't seen in any of the broad kind of Blackboard reports or broad industry reports that online fundraising has declined. And certainly we've seen the same thing in our data as well. But also that technology is rapidly adapting to make things easier. Across the board, whether it's on your fundraising platforms, whether it's on your digital ads, whether it's on your email marketing, technology is getting vastly more sophisticated to make running these campaigns easier than ever. Some really interesting comments in the chat. Thank you, Alana, Nicole, Belinda, and Gabrielle. All right. There's some key data points around 2022 that we're going to have a quick look into. Martin's going to take us through those.
Thanks, Tom. So here we've got data from 2022 and from 2021. So these are the last two complete years of data that we've got. And on the x-axis here, we've got organization year-on-year growth. So how much each of the organizations using Raisley, who was using Raisley in both those years, grew. And we've kind of called out a couple of key numbers. So the median organization is the middle organization, and the middle organization grew by about 5% in 2022. That's down a little bit from 2021, which was 28%. And I think Tom noted that that's similar to what we've heard anecdotally. Lots of organizations maybe peaked a little bit in 2021, and 2022 was a more difficult year. We still see that the top 25% of organizations, which is a huge number of organizations on Raisley, their year-on-year growth was around 92%. So that's getting close to doubling. If that was 100%, that would be doubling their fundraising on Raisley year-on-year. And the top 5% of organizations got close to sort of 4 or 5 times the level of fundraising that they had in the previous year. So we're still seeing lots of organizations really rapidly grow, but 2022, I think some of those struggles and difficulties that Tom laid out, we see come through in the data. That just lays that out, what I said there. We've sort of got 2 slides, some with the text, and we can have a little bit more of a discussion on it for each of the things we're going to talk about. The second thing that we wanted to note was traffic, and so sort of new users per day. So on the left here, we've got the number of new users for each organization per day. And the dot here is again reflecting that median value. And we saw a slight decrease. It's not a huge number of users different in 22 compared to 2021, but a slight decrease in the median number of users. But what we did see, so here's looking at median new users per day, but broken down by the source of the traffic. And in 2022, we definitely saw a decrease in the level of Facebook traffic. And we'll look at that for peer-to-peer campaigns and appeal campaigns a little bit later. And it's a really similar story all the way through, that Facebook traffic is usually a huge source of traffic for many campaigns. And there was a bit of a dip in that, and that it was harder to get that traffic through to your Raisley page in 2022.
Which has been a good question that's come through here, Martin. How are we controlling for organizations here?
Yeah, so we look at each organization, and so this value here is the median organization. So there would be some organizations that would have thousands of users per day, and some organizations that have a sort of smaller number. We do put a little bit of a filter just to take out the sort of the inactive campaigns, but the median value here is the median organization. And again, here, this is looking at the median organization. And when I say median, I'm just meeting the middle. So there's half of the organizations are above that value and half of the organizations are below that. The last sort of data point we wanted to highlight at the organizational level was conversion rates. And that's a bit of an encouraging story. So what we saw is that conversion rates, and particularly user conversion rates, so the number of users who come to your Raisely page and then convert and make a donation, that increased in 2022. So the median organization conversion rate was around 18%. And that's getting close to 1 in every 5 people who come to your Raisely page making a donation, which is a really great conversion rate. We think that that's sort of above really industry standards for donation forms. And it was great to see that increase. And what that tells us is that people are using Raisely to build really compelling websites and pages that incentivize and provide reason why people should donate to those organizations. On the right-hand side here, we've broken down conversion rate by source, so the source of the traffic, and this is looking at organizations overall. We only have this data for 2022, but it's an interesting story in that direct traffic, email traffic, these are sort of the highest converting traffic when we look at organizations as a whole. When we look at peer-to-peer campaigns, which we'll explore in detail in a little bit, Facebook traffic really is a much more higher converting traffic for those types of campaigns. But when we're looking at organizations as a whole, these are sort of the most important sources of traffic. And yeah, we'll explore and talk about all these things a little bit more. I think back to you, Thomas.
Yeah, I think it's just really interesting to see this kind of laid out in the data. I think for a lot of us, this is stuff that we might know instinctively, but to have those kind of understanding of conversion rates, to have that change in traffic and that looking at the median organization really helps us understand kind of where we place ourselves within these benchmarks. But certainly as we look at the data, and we're about to talk about this in more detail, but we look at the data and we look at kind of the year ahead, I think it's fair to say that certainly from our perspective, diversification is the key for charities big and small. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that it's important that charities are not just relying on a single source of revenue for their fundraising. For example, back in 2020, we saw virtual peer-to-peer struggle to have the same strength as it did in 2021, but appeals and giving days remained strong throughout the year. And so having a range of campaigns that attract a different range of audiences that are all different mechanisms is so important for us to be resilient to all of the things that are going on around us at any one particular time. And we see kind of the most successful charities, both on our platform, but also in the industry, are ones who are leaning into digital fundraising across all of those different fundraising streams, whether it's the online recruitment of major givers, whether there's ensuring that there's an online component of every direct mail you send out, through to having a broad program of peer-to-peer campaigns now that starting a peer-to-peer campaign is so easy. And we'll see that in the data in a second. What we're going to go through next is some organizational fundraising strategy. And so the first part of the really detailed data we want to share today is actually looking at whole organizations or whole charities on Raisely. And here we're trying to identify strategies that have a clear relationship with increased fundraising. So these are not only benchmarks that you can just note in your head and say, okay, well, we're above benchmark or below benchmark. These are actually things that the data tells us lead to greater fundraising with all of the controls and the quality that we've put in place here. Martin's going to take us through those, and I can jump in with snippets of commentary where it's helpful, but over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Tom. So yeah, as I noted at the beginning, this is one of those instances where we're using regression analysis, and I don't want to bore you with a particularly detailed statistics lesson, but I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of what's happening here. And so this is, in regression, we kind of take all the data we have, and that for us, we're really fortunate. We have huge amounts of data. So we have sort of 6,000 campaigns from 2,000 organizations, and we can take that and look at it all at the same time. And we can also sort of look at all the different things that we want to look at, all the different factors that we think might influence fundraising, we can look at them at the same time as well. And so this helps us, when you sort of look at pockets of the data on its own, you can kind of see trends that might not really be there, but in doing regression analysis and looking at everything at the same time, and also controlling for some of those confounding things, or maybe you have one really, really large organization or a particularly sophisticated campaign or something like that, they can kind of skew your data. And so in running this analysis, we can kind of put those things out and really look at what the signal is, the most important things that we want to see. And so we've kind of highlighted today 4 strategies that we think are really important and are associated with pretty dramatic increases in fundraising. So here on the x-axis, this is the campaign fundraising multiplier. So if you have a campaign and it does one of these 4 things on the left, this is the multiplier that we'd expect to see in terms of fundraising. So for example, using match giving, which I'll talk a little bit more about in detail in a second on what match giving is, but using match giving, that is expected to increase fundraising, or campaigns that use that have an expected increase in around close to 4 times, 3.7 times, campaigns that don't use match giving. Or another example is campaigns that use regular giving. They're routinely expected to increase campaign fundraising by 2 times, so doubling fundraising. The next one there is using custom Raisely messages, which is a feature that we have on Raisely, and that's close to 2 times, 1.9 times fundraising. And the last one there is if you add a different campaign type. So organizations that are running more in different campaign types, for each campaign, a different campaign type they add, the fundraising per campaign increases by about 10%. So yeah, that just to note that again, the fundraising per campaign increases by 10%. So all of their campaigns start to raise a little bit more because they're doing this kind of diversified thing, as Tom kind of highlighted. Is there anything you want to highlight there, Tom, before I jump into sort of each of these 4 things in a little bit more detail?
Nothing extra. I think go for it.
So the first thing that we wanted to talk about is using match giving partnerships, or a feature that we have on Raisely called match giving. And so what that involves is usually partnering with perhaps a large organization, or maybe, a large donor. So that it might be a local business or a wealthy individual, someone who can match donations that are provided by other donors. And then you tell your community who might be fundraising, for the next 24 hours or 48 hours, all your donations will be matched. And it provides a kind of key moment in your campaign to really accelerate giving and bring more donations in. So for example, if someone's giving $50, it might say to them, if you give now, your $50 will become $100 or $150 because it'll be matched by that wealthy individual. And when we just look at the 2 campaigns, so around 5% of campaigns on Raisely use matched donation matching, so not a large proportion, but that 5% really does sort of, those campaigns raise substantially more. So the dot here again is the median of those campaigns, and then on the right-hand side, we've got the median of the campaigns that don't use donation matching. And so you can see there that I think it's roughly 4 or 5 times the level in terms of median donations for campaigns that used match giving. And when we control for all those other things, it's 3.7 times as sort of the expected increase in terms of campaigns that use match giving. But yeah, a fantastic strategy and really easy to implement. You sort of, it's set up in terms of putting it together on Raisely. The only last thing to note here is that this 35,000 doesn't actually include the value of those matching transactions. So it only includes the value of transactions from people who made individual contributions, not the value of those overarching matching contributions. So the impact really is even greater.
You're going to see this come up more when we look at peer-to-peer and appeals, because surprise, surprise, this is a top tip for both of those as well. But really, the thing is here is that match giving is such a moment that it creates so much excitement around a campaign, and certainly is a great thing to use for your organization. We're hoping that you can use this data to send to your corporate partners, to send to your major givers and convince them to come on board for a match giving campaign, whether that's in relation to your peer-to-peer, whether that's an appeal. We will tackle that. Martin, quick question that's come through from Alison. When we were looking at this kind of regression analysis, we're saying that matched giving is 3.7x multiplier, adding a different campaign is a 0.1 multiplier, a 10% multiplier. Is that additive?
Yeah, so those things can combine together. Yeah, definitely. And so you can kind of quite quickly get to campaigns that are raising 10 times the value of other campaigns. When you're using match giving, you're asking for regular giving at the same time, using Raisely messages, running multiple different kind of campaigns in the year as an organization. Yeah, you can quite quickly, maybe 5 or 10 times in terms of the campaign size, implementing some of these relatively straightforward strategies, which is great.
Oh, well, let's continue
on. The second strategy we wanted to highlight today was inviting donors to give regularly. So regular giving involves a supporter committing to donate to your organization regularly, as it suggests. So that's maybe weekly. They might give $10 or $20, or monthly, giving $50 or $100, but signing up as a sort of subscription, as we call them in Raisely, to support your organization regularly. And so on the left here, we've got the sort of amount of fundraising from a donor, and then we've kind of grouped them into 2 groups. So whether that donor participated in any regular giving, and whether that donor hasn't participated in any regular giving. And we've just added up the total fundraising for that donor, and then the dots here represent the median donor. And so, as you can see, the median donor who participates in regular giving, their contribution across all of their donations is 3 times the level as someone who doesn't participate in regular giving. And one thing to note is that the tail on this distribution, the level that can go, really does go pretty high in terms of people who participate in regular giving can give much, much more. And so sort of maximizing the amount that individuals give you, getting them to participate if there's someone who wants to in regular giving is a great way to maximize that. And also create a steady revenue stream for you and create certainty in how your operations can go forward, because you kind of have this base of donations that will happen routinely. And then the second thing just to note is that per campaign, so campaigns that use regular giving typically raise twice the amount as campaigns that don't have any regular giving. And we have regular giving as default on all of our campaigns and donation forms. There's a monthly option and other options that you can put on your donation form. And perhaps thinking about, well, what's some way we can particularly attract regular givers, whether it's running an appeal campaign designed around inviting people to become a regular giver, or other things that you can do in your communications with your donor base to get them to become regular givers. It's a really powerful strategy to increase your fundraising.
I think, and what we're talking about here on that kind of campaign slide is really that we're inviting people to make a regular donation on that campaign. So it's campaigns that ask folks to make regular donations is where we see that uplift. We actually see this across other campaign types too that we'll talk about that were perhaps a little surprising to us. But yes, I'm just looking at the questions there, and this really is about simply making the option available to your campaigns. We see that increase on the campaign graph there.
Our third strategy is engaging contacts with tailored communication. So Raisely comes with a bunch of built-in default messages for communicating with donors, thanking them for a donation, and communicating with donors around peer-to-peer campaigns. But we also offer an add-on called Raisely Messages, which enables you to create custom messages, and you can communicate with your database sort of flexibly however you want. You can send them email messages, but also SMS messages. And we're really excited to see that the impact of this feature of Raisely really has a dramatic impact on the level of fundraising. So across all of Raisely, in that regression analysis, we campaigns that use Raisely messages typically raise 1.9 times or close to 2 times the amount as campaigns that don't use raising messages. But we also see a bit of a strong relationship. So campaigns that don't have any raising messages, their median fundraising is around 7,000. That doubles when you start just using 1 to 10 to close to 13,000. That triples just about from there when you start using 11 to 20 messages, and then it starts to slow down. So you can go too far in terms of sending too many messages and bombarding your donor base, or it just has a diminishing effect particularly. But that sort of 1 to 20 messages per campaign, which can be quite a lot, but using those to communicate with your donor base, that's the sort of sweet spot in terms of maximizing campaign fundraising with raising messages.
I think the other thing to mention here is that, of course, we're talking about raising messages here because that's the data we see. But you would expect the same benefit with any kind of marketing automation program with your campaign. So if you use your own CRM to send emails, if you use a tool like Auto or HubSpot or MailChimp, then you should expect to see a similar result here. The key to this is that you can't launch a campaign and then not talk to your supporters. You need to have a journey there that is quite a reasonable journey to make sure that you're talking to your supporters, you're teaching them how to fundraise, you're doing as much as you can. So yeah, we're just looking at the data here is just from our add-on and our tools, but should apply more broadly than that.
The last strategy that we wanted to highlight today is trying a different type of campaign. So Tom mentioned this a little bit earlier, but what we've done here is look at the different campaigns that an organization runs on Raisely. So you might use Raisely for a whole wide variety of things, including appeal campaigns, peer-to-peer campaigns, community hub, which is a sort of different type of community engagement campaign, just having a donation form of Raisely on your website. And we've grouped organizations into what they use Raisely for. And what we really see is this trend of organizations that use Raisely for a wide variety of things. So appeals, peer-to-peer, community, more things, they tend to raise more per campaign than organizations that just use Raisely for one thing. So just use us for peer-to-peer, or just use us for their donation form, or just use them for appeals. And it's a bit of a broad trend, but again, as we noted earlier, if an organization, say, moves from just using a Raisely for their appeals to trying their first peer-to-peer campaign, we typically see that rather than sort of splitting their donations across 2 campaigns, both of those campaigns would raise a little bit more, because it provides an opportunity for new supporters to find that organization, but also an opportunity for existing supporters to support in a different way to provide a new donation. And so finding some way to diversify your fundraising and try something different this year might be a great way to increase fundraising across all your campaigns. Anything you wanted to add on that one, Tom?
Yeah, I think this just is back to that diversification point, that this is, it's just so important to run multiple campaigns, to have multiple opportunities for people to support you. And I think the other thing this says is that the more campaigns and the more diverse campaigns you run, and this could be on Raisely, it could be on across your organization as a whole, the more sophisticated you get as a team at running those campaigns, and the quicker you get, and the better those campaigns get. And I think that's part of the effect we're seeing in the data here.
And we just wanted to highlight, we have some really fantastic templates, particularly if you want to get a campaign up really quickly. Our appeal template is really beautifully designed and ready to go, and has everything in it to get a campaign set up really quickly. Appeal campaigns tend to take a little bit less effort than perhaps a peer-to-peer campaign or something like that. But yeah, there's some fantastic templates that we have set up, and you might want to have a look at the different ones that we've got there.
All right, so thanks Martin for taking us through all of that. They were our kind of top strategies to consider as an organization for 2023 as we're going forward, and you're thinking about your makeup of your campaigns and the kind of things to prioritize. Just to recap what they were firstly to leverage match giving partnerships to magnify those donor contributions. We see match giving having an outsized impact on the success of your campaigns. And it's a really great strategy to be thinking about in the coming year. Secondly, when you invite donors to give regularly on your campaigns, even in places where that might feel a little odd, we certainly see that creates an uplift in fundraising. We know, and I'm sure everyone here knows, that regular donors are such an important source of revenue for charities, but making sure we've got multiple opportunities to onboard them can really make a difference to that campaign. Secondly, your tailored communication is so important. We see that having a huge impact on your fundraising, whether you use Raisely messages or another tool, but making sure you're communicating regularly with your supporters and sending at least or up to perhaps 20 messages a campaign can be really important. I've got a question about that, which I'll address in a second. But fourthly, try a different type of campaign to find those new donors. So really spread out the diversity of your fundraising, try different campaigns, run more campaigns, spread them in the calendar. It can be really easy to start up different styles of campaigns these days, whether that's on Raisely or on what other platforms that you're working with. We have time for a very quick break. But while I do that, we've got a couple of questions that I'm going to flick Martin's way. We also have a poll. So I'm just going to release the poll very quickly. We would love to hear your plans for 2023. It's going to pop up in your Zoom window. We'd love some answers. I'll call out some of them. If you need to grab a drink of water, then do that now. We'll continue on in about 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But Martin, while folks are answering that poll, wanted to ask kind of the values that we're showing here today. Are these particularly in relation to regular donors and these kind of campaigns? Are these annual values? Are these lifetime values? Kind of over what time period are we generally looking at here?
They're sort of for most of those values that we just looked at, they're per campaign. So it's for the lifetime of the campaign. Most campaigns typically run on Raisely for, a fixed period. Maybe it's 90 days or sort of 3 to 4 months or that kind of thing. But we're looking at campaign per campaign. Some of the numbers might have been organization, but that would be like yearly for the organization. But typically we're looking at things per campaign, and everything for the rest of it will be campaign based.
Cool. I think Ingrid's asked, over what time period are we sending 20 plus messages? I think it's a daunting number. Is that generally just over the course of a campaign, or has that been looked at more broadly?
Yeah, that's over the course of the campaign. And so that's looking at the number of messages specifically associated with a campaign. And there'd definitely be fewer campaigns that have those larger amounts of messages. And so it's maybe a little bit less reliable, but somewhere in that range. Most campaigns tend to run, as I said, between 3 to 4 months or something like that. And so, it's pretty regular messaging.
Yeah. I think the thing to add is we're not asking you to send 20 messages to each person. It's certainly what we see in those campaigns is different journeys and different filters that are being sent. For an appeal, it's probably pretty reasonable to say send 4 to 5 messages over the life of the appeal, a few reminders, and then a report back or 2 at the end. A peer-to-peer campaign, you probably have different journeys. So you might have a journey to activate your supporters to get them to raise their first $1, and then you probably have another journey to help them hit their goal, and someone's not going to receive all of those emails. So this is really looking at the number of messages configured within the Raisely platform over the number of messages sent to donors. Heather's asked, how would you run multiple campaigns at the same time or within a short time span? And it's a good question, particularly for oh my gosh, I have so much to do. How am I going to do all of these things? And I think the answer is you don't necessarily need to run them at the same time. Certainly what we're looking at here is over the course of a year. So when we say that, you should run more campaigns, you should diversify your fundraising, it really is over the course of a year that you should do that. So you can try to spread them out that works in a way that works for your capacity. It's great to set up things like templates for those campaigns at the start of the year while you've got a bit of quiet time, or in July, which is kind of a bit of quiet time for everyone. And then you can roll those out really quickly. All right. Thanks everyone for popping in some answers to the poll. I can see there's a few more people typing there, and I don't think I can see the answers until I end it. So I'm going to report back on those answers once we've in our next break. But before we kick off, I have one more poll for you. I can launch this one too. No, that one will come later. We've got cute photos of dogs. That'll come later. We're going to talk peer-to-peer fundraising. All right. So we're starting to, we're going to share some benchmarks on peer-to-peer campaigns and peer-to-peer fundraising. Firstly, let's just make sure we're all on the same page in terms of a definition. So peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns engage your supporters to fundraise in support of you. So these are everything from DIY fundraising hubs to charity challenges to virtual events, all of those kinds of things. Generally, you have folks signing up, they get a page that they promote that page on their networks, and their friends, family, and colleagues all donate to them. We then see that peer-to-peer campaigns often raise more than appeals, generally is true across the board. However, recognize that peer-to-peer campaigns often take more resources to run. You need to acquire your supporters. You've generally got a more complex website to build. You've got a more complex acquisition and activation plan. They're generally just bigger things to run. But because they're big, there's so much that we have to dive into here. So we're going to be talking a little bit about, we're going to start with some peer-to-peer benchmarks, and these are generally compared to 2021 to 2022. That's just because I think there's something interesting in the difference there. It helps you contextualize these numbers. So we're going to talk about those, give you some benchmarks. If you don't capture them all, that's okay. Remember, there will be a recording. We've also got a cheat sheet at the end of this presentation with the key benchmarks on one page. So we're going to go through those, and then we've also got some same recommendations. But Martin, do you want to take us through those benchmarks?
Yes. So the first thing we wanted to look at is sort of peer-to-peer fundraising, just at a whole, how much do peer-to-peer campaigns that are run on Raisely typically raise, and compare that between 2021 and 2022. And what we saw is that there was a slight dip generally. So the median campaign on Raisely dipped by around $1,000 from 15,000 to 14,000, but particularly at the higher end, so those larger peer-to-peer campaigns, the top 5% or the top 25%, they sort of struggled to get the same fundraising that they had seen in 2021 in 2022. So it was a little bit of a challenge in terms of fundraising for peer-to-peer campaigns in 2022. Yeah, and particularly at the sort of larger side of peer-to-peer campaigns. I suppose if you're one of those organizations, it might have been something you've experienced, and certainly some of the communication we've had of some of the organizations using Raisely, we got that feedback, and yeah, just that understanding from them. The second thing we looked at specifically with peer-to-peer campaigns, and this is quite a similar story to what we saw as organizations as a whole, is that traffic remains steady, or probably maybe better to say decreased slightly, but Facebook traffic, which is such a key source of traffic, as we'll see in a second for peer-to-peer campaigns, there was quite a big sort of drop in terms of Facebook traffic for peer-to-peer campaigns. And we zoomed in specifically on some and just saw it as clear as day that campaigns weren't getting the same level of Facebook traffic that they'd seen in previous years. The last sort of benchmark for, oh, it's not the last benchmark, sorry, but the next thing for peer-to-peer campaigns is looking at conversion rates. And this is kind of quite a different story in that conversion rates for peer-to-peer campaigns increased probably the most dramatically of any campaigns, that different type of campaigns that were running on Raisely. So there in 2022, it was over 20%, over 1 in 5 people who was visiting a peer-to-peer campaign was making a donation to that organization. That's the median peer-to-peer campaign. And that's up around 3 percentage points from 2021. And here you really see the difference in sort of traffic for peer-to-peer campaigns, and the reason why like Facebook traffic is so crucial for peer-to-peer campaigns. That's where people who are fundraising on behalf of that organization or in support of that organization, they share their profile typically on social media, maybe on Facebook, LinkedIn, other sources. And that's where they're going to tell their community and their network I'm doing this, would you come and support me? And so those social channels are particularly important, but direct traffic still has the highest conversion rate for peer-to-peer campaigns. Anything you wanted to add on that traffic or conversion piece, Tom?
Yeah, I think this was so interesting when we pulled it out to see these conversion rates, because they really provide a helpful benchmark for you to be looking at your campaign and your traffic sources from. But really, like, this also highlights kind of the importance of Facebook with fundraising. From what we're seeing, like, Facebook has quite a high conversion rate for peer-to-peer campaigns. Of course, that's because people are sharing their pages out. It's a big source of donations coming through. And it's why features like Facebook fundraising are so important. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But also that decrease in traffic that we saw from Facebook certainly impacts how much people are able to raise. And we think ultimately that's a visibility problem. People just aren't seeing their friends' posts on Facebook as much as they were in the past. People probably are spending a bit less time on Facebook because they're not locked inside. That's a guess, not a fact. But I think that's kind of what we're seeing here. But certainly you should be able to look at your own analytics and benchmark your own conversion rates against what we're seeing here. But really, to see that increase shows that generally we're getting more sophisticated with our targeting, with our platforms, all of those kinds of things. The other thing just to say, to answer a question here from Jason, this traffic analysis is done internally. So we are classifying traffic based on the referrer to Raisley or other kind of little bits of information that we see. So it's not necessarily, this analysis is not necessarily from Google Analytics or similar. It is based on the referrer to the page of the referrer of the session. Is that right, Martin?
Yeah, and any kind of tag or source information that we have, it's a messy job trying to get that into something that makes sense, but we do our best. Yeah.
We've done a bit of a classification exercise to try to put things into the most appropriate bucket.
Yeah. The next thing was a little bit of a surprise for peer-to-peer campaigns in that they tended to be actually a decent amount quicker in 2022 compared to 2021. So on the left here, we've got the weeks since campaign activation, and that's since the campaign raises their first dollar. And then on the y-axis is the percentage of total fundraising for that campaign. And you can see that it's a pretty linear increase for the median campaign, which is shown in the line, pretty linear from week 0 through to week 7 or week 8 is where things really start to slow down for most organizations. But that was sort of 2 or 3 weeks quicker than 2021 in 2022. And we saw that sort of looking at the total campaign active days. So that's from the first donation to the last donation. That decreased by around 10%. And I think the main thing just to note there is that peer-to-peer campaigns can move quite quickly. Really, things are going to be wrapped up in around 8 weeks. Of course, people run different peer-to-peer campaigns and some of them are run over quite an extended period, but you've got to kind of be set up and ready to move from day one and have everything in place, ready to go. That's what is kind of happening and what we're seeing.
It's really interesting that it's condensed quite a lot. I think it just says that we've got shorter attention spans, that we need to run snappier campaigns, perhaps run more smaller campaigns that fit in the year. But what we're trying to do with this data is just try to give you an expectation of how long a campaign should run and how long you should plan for it to run. So don't plan for a campaign to be 4 months when we know that on average it's going to be about 2 weeks. And certainly like a large part of that, that money is raised in those first 7 weeks. So use this as a bit of a guide when you're thinking about your timelines for your campaign, whether that's when you start acquisition through to what kind of email cadence you work on and in terms of your analysis through the campaign. We've raised half of what we're going to raise about 4 weeks in, for example.
Peer-to-peer campaigns are made up of what we call profiles, or you might think of them as individual fundraisers who run their own mini campaign in support of the organization that's running the overall campaign. So you have a number of different people. The sort of median number of profiles that were created for a peer-to-peer campaign was around 40, but we regularly see campaigns that have hundreds and hundreds of fundraisers who sign up. Each of them, runs their own little mini campaign. And sort of three important metrics that are useful to think about when you're thinking about a peer-to-peer campaign, and maybe modeling what you might expect to see, what your fundraising you can expect from a peer-to-peer campaign are the profiles that are created. And so that decreased slightly, but at the higher end. So the top of these bars, by the way, I should have noted this earlier, all of them are the top 25%. So 25% of organization of peer-to-peer campaigns had more than 160 fundraisers. Some of them had thousands. And then the bottom 25% as well. Not all of those people who sign up for your peer-to-peer campaign are going to activate and raise their first dollar. We saw that the activation rate increased slightly from 75% to 76%. So that means that 3/4 of this 43 individuals are then activating and raising fundraising. And increasing your activation rate slightly can have a big increase in the amount you fundraise, because you're getting an extra person who's out there supporting you, asking people for donations to support your organization. And then the last metric is fundraising per activated profile. So if you take all the fundraising from that campaign and divide it by the number of activated profiles, this is that number. And we did see a bit of a decrease in fundraising per activated profile in 2022. That was down by around $30, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but when you multiply that by 100 profiles or 200 profiles, it quickly adds up to sort of a substantial decrease in fundraising, particularly at that higher amount. And so that's just, I guess, might make sense a little bit of what happened in 2022, particularly those larger campaigns. They might have seen a similar level of number of people signing up, a similar level of number of people activating, but the fundraising per individual was a little bit harder. And that goes to those kind of comments around Facebook and just getting the message out and organic share and all those kind of things. You might use these numbers. So if you have in mind, I'd like to get 100 people to sign up for my peer-to-peer campaign, I think my activation rate is going to be around this, or these are the usual ranges of activation rates, and I'd like each of those who activate to raise this much. You can get a forecast of what you think your total campaign will be, and that can be helpful in kind of planning what resources you want to put into it.
It's a great figure to go to your board or your CEO with to get approval for your exciting new campaign idea. The other thing I just add here is that these bars, as Martin mentioned, they represent the range, the bottom 25% to the top 25%. For me, it shows potential. So when we're looking at things like the fundraising per activated profile, there's huge potential really to be getting up at that kind of nearly $1,000 mark per profile. And that represents a very high performing campaign. Same with that activation rate. You know, we see some charities get that up really high, above 80%, but it can be quite low too. And activation rate depends a lot on the messages that you're sending, the kind of campaign proposition you have, but also the signups you're getting. Are you qualifying signups appropriately, or are people signing up just to get free stuff and don't actually want to fundraise? There is a good question in the chat that these activation rates are quite different to past ones that we've shown. I think in the past we've said around 50 to 60%. This is a fresh analysis that I think is more detailed. Are these numbers on this graph, Martin, are they medians or averages?
Medians, yeah.
So that also probably is the difference. In the past we've shown averages, and Martin has enforced in us at Raisley across all of our analytics the importance of a median as a truer statistic representing the typical experience, or the middle experience, than an average, which can be unduly influenced by outliers. So that's probably why these are different to our past webinars as well.
The next thing to note is that each of those fundraisers, they raise their funds. So each of your kind of mini campaigns within around 3 weeks. So while a full peer-to-peer might run for 8 weeks, the time from the first donation for a profile to raising the total amount that they're going to raise is around 3 weeks. And so it's just important to keep in mind, I think, that while you're thinking in terms of my campaign's running for this long, the people fundraising to support your organization are maybe engaging for a small period during that broader campaign. and you might want to make sure that your communication with them, your messages moves quite quickly to kind of move them along on their journey, knowing that they're not going to be starting on day 0 and ending on week 8. They'll join for a period in the middle of that time. We're up to thinking about dollar amounts for peer-to-peer campaigns. And I think there's always a good conversation around dollar amounts, and people are always excited around dollar amounts. Perhaps the news is like slightly underwhelming in that the most common donation amount for 2022 for peer-to-peer campaigns was exactly the same as the most common donation amount for peer-to-peer campaigns in 2021, which was $50. We keep seeing $50 as being the kind of key amount. And yeah, so I suppose I think we would really like to see that increase to 55 or 60, and to see organizations and campaigns looking at their dollar handles and thinking, how can I optimize these? What small changes can I make to help shift our fundraising by a little? So having a $55 handle instead of a $50 handle might increase fundraising by 10% or something in that order. So sort of the next few months at Raisley, we're going to be thinking a fair bit about donation forms and doing a bunch of research into what are the best donation handles you can put on your form, what's the layout of those. Doing a bunch of research that's helpful. We can't say too much, and we've got that work to do, but that's work that I'm really excited for. A couple of other key things there is the median donation amount, which is the middle donation amount for a peer-to-peer campaign, and that was roughly the same, down by around $1, and the average amount was down by 60 cents or so. So donation amounts for peer-to-peer campaigns were very steady in 2022. One thing I wanted to highlight around donation amounts is the importance of large donation amounts, even for peer-to-peer campaigns. So we broke donation amounts into kind of 3 broad groups: those above 250, which is the orange color, those between 50 and 250, and donations under $50. So taking all of our transactions and breaking them into those 3 groups. And then on the left here, we've got the percentage of transactions, so the number of transactions in each of those groups. And we saw that around 4% of transactions were above 250. So they're quite uncommon donations, but that they make up 35% of fundraising. So a huge proportion of fundraising. Whereas if you look at donations under $50, that's more than half of the number of donations, but that's only making up 18% of the total of fundraising. And so I think 2 points that I wanted to make here is that you want to really maximize the chance or increase this percentage. So make it a possibility for someone to give you a large donation amount in your communications, and on your donation handles. Having an amount over 250 makes it easier for someone to give you that amount, and maximizes the chance that someone will give you a large donation amount, while also at the same time maximizing the value of all of those transactions under 50. So you might just want to limit the number of donation handles that you have under 50, maybe just having 1 donation handle on your forms that's under $50, and making it sort of on the upper end, so 35 versus maybe 20. I'm just saying numbers, and I'm not sort of trying to tell you exactly what you need to put on your form, but just thinking about those large donations are going to make up a big chunk of my fundraising. How can I maximize the number of people who are giving me a donation in that range can be really helpful and make a difference in terms of overall fundraising.
We've seen a good amount of success for organizations who do increase the dollar amounts in their form. You need to be careful to not go overboard, because there is a point where if you make those donation amounts in a peer-to-peer campaign too high, that they lose their effect entirely and people just give what they want to give, which is $50. But we have seen some campaigns raise those to like 65 or start at 75 and kind of have $3 or $4 handles between about $60, $70 and $150 that can work quite well. So definitely play with your own dollar amounts, and just to reinforce that pushing people up into those larger categories can really have an outsized impact on your campaign. All right, some peer-to-peer takeaways. They were our benchmarks. They were our insights. We have more. No, we have more. These are our peer-to-peer takeaways. So they're the benchmarks. So fundraising was down in 2022, particularly at the higher end. So those larger campaigns probably rely a little bit more on Facebook acquisition, those kinds of things. Traffic was pretty steady, though Facebook decreased, which means that we've got to find ways to make sure that our fundraisers are able to get their campaigns out to their supporters, and we can't rely on Facebook as much for that. Conversion rates remained really strong. So we've got about 24% with direct traffic. Direct traffic, there's a few questions about direct traffic. Direct traffic is unattributable traffic. So we assume they've entered the URL in, they've clicked a link from an email, but we don't know it's an email. They've scanned a QR code, those kinds of things. Traffic we don't know about is called direct traffic. So conversion rates increased. Facebook traffic was one of the highest converting sources. Fourthly, donations above 250 AUD made up more than 1/3 of fundraising, even though that was only 4% of transactions. And then lastly, P2P campaigns are getting quicker as our attention span is shortening. So we're seeing a P2P campaign last about 8 weeks in 2022, and we'd expect that to continue to 2023. All right. While we pause here, I'm just going to share the results from the last poll, and then Martin's going to talk through some drivers and profile activation and fundraising. But thanks for everyone who filled out that last poll. That was absolutely incredible. There's some really great tips that you're able to see there, so feel free to click through those. But some awesome pieces of advice. It's making sure that you've got dedicated resources towards your fundraising strategy, making sure that you're sharing things like emotive stories of people's work. There was some other great lessons. Lean on your network of supporters. Things like make your ask, so your dollar ask, assertive and essential. Potential donors should feel like their contribution is crucial to the success of your work. And then a really good advice, particularly from the strategy perspective: get in front of the CEO of your organizations when there are critical decisions to be made about fundraising. When you don't have a voice with your leadership, particularly at orgs that are not as reliant on fundraising income, you lose momentum in program development. And the last one I'd call out is trust your gut and go with it, which I love. I think that's how most of us operate. So I've shared those results. I'm a bit new to Zoom poll, so hopefully you can all see them. Have a read through some of those tips that other folks on the webinar have shared. In the meantime, we're going to talk a little bit about the drivers for peer-to-peer activation and fundraising. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Tom. So as we noted, peer-to-peer campaigns are run by fundraisers doing their own little campaign within your broader campaign. And as we've said, we have a wealth of data in this space. And so we wanted to look at what are the drivers for those individuals in terms of activating. What are the things that we see that are really associated with them activating, raising their first dollar? Here we're actually looking at raising their first dollar from someone else, not their self-donations, but raising their first dollar from someone else. And also just the total amount they fundraise. What are some of the things that are associated with larger fundraising amounts for individuals? And so we run a regression similar to that regression that we ran for looking at all organizations, but here we're looking at individuals and we're controlling for the organization that they came from, the campaign that they were participated in. So we want to kind of move those things that we can't control, what organization and campaign, to the background and look at the things that we can control or that individual can do, or we can encourage that individual to do to really increase their chance of activation or increase the level of fundraising for them. So there's a fair few different things that we looked at for each of these. And first, we're going to have a look at profile activation. So on the x-axis here, we have like the increase in chance of activation that's associated with these factors that we've kind of pulled out here on the left. So if there's one thing maybe that you take away from today, it's that encouraging profiles to share their profile. Raisely has inbuilt, once someone's created their profile, that they're then able to share it. Profiles that do share it, their chance of activation increases by 55 percentage points. So that means if their chance of activation before sharing was around 20%, their chance of activation after sharing is now 75%. So that's a huge shift in the chance that they're going to receive fundraising from someone else. The second thing is donating to themselves. So yeah, as I said, we're counting activation here as receiving a donation from someone else. So there's around a 27 percentage point increase in activation for those who have donated to themselves compared to those who haven't donated to themselves. Yeah, I can go through the full list. So receiving a custom message. So someone using Razely messages to send something to a profile on Razely, that's again around a 27 percentage point increase. Using Facebook Fundraiser, which is an integration that we released towards the end of last year. So there's only a small number of profiles in that group, but we see them activating higher. I think, Tom, you used the words super share to describe Facebook Fundraiser. It's really getting the message out there and perhaps overcoming some of those challenges that we've seen in sort of organic sharing on Facebook. Then some more simple things. So things like adding a photo, completing their description. We also see team members activating slightly higher from profiles that aren't a member of a team. And the great thing is that all of these things add up. So you can quite quickly get to a profile that has a 95% chance of activating if they've shared their profile, if they've donated to themselves, if they've added their photo. These things add together and combine together to kind of determine or give us an indication of how likely that profile is to receive donations from someone else. And these are all things that you can, or just about all things that you can encourage your fundraisers to do, or tools that you can use to communicate and interact with your fundraisers. The second thing that we looked at in terms of individual fundraisers was the amount of fundraising per profile. And so we looked at an even longer list of kind of factors that are associated with profile fundraising. And I think this is particularly important in the context of fundraising per profile was down in 2022. So thinking about these things and trying to implement them, encourage fundraisers to do them, they can actually sort of reverse that trend a little bit and increase fundraising per profile. These are some of the tools that we have to shift that. So the top one here is received regular giving, which is a bit of a strange one. And the reason why the sort of error bars on that estimate there are wide is because not a huge number of profiles in peer-to-peer campaigns use regular giving, but it's not unheard of. And depending on the type of campaign or what your ask is, it might be appropriate. And we see profiles that do use regular giving or have that as part of their profile, they raise more than twice the amount as profiles that don't use regular giving. Other things that we've already talked about today, match donations. And so a part of your peer-to-peer campaign might be having a moment in your campaign for 48 hours, all donations across the campaign will be matched. Again, that's a 2 times increase in profile fundraising. Thanking donors is another 2 times increase. I won't go through all the full list. I was just going to call out a couple of others. So again, receiving a custom Razely message is associated with sort of a 60%, 1.6 times 60% increase in fundraising. Facebook fundraisers, those that we've seen so far, are kind of raising 30% more compared to all our other profiles. And the last one, I think, just to note that team members tend to raise a little bit less than people who are just fundraising on their own. And we think that's just like, we haven't allocated the fundraising that also goes to the team. So it's sort of spread around different individuals, and some of it also can just go directly to the team. So team members might raise a little bit less. Was there any other ones that you wanted to highlight there, Tom?
No, I mean, some broad commentary about how to use this data maybe, which kind of goes to our final slide here anyway. But the reason we're sharing this is to help you prioritize the things that you could do within a peer-to-peer campaign. So essentially what we're saying is that when we're talking about activation, then the most important thing you should be getting your supporters to do. So if you're sending them emails, if you're on the phone to them, if you're setting up your dashboard and asking them to do things. The most important thing you should be doing is getting them to share their page, firstly, and secondly, donating to themselves. And one of the great ways to do that is by sending them emails that ask them to do those particular things, emails or SMS messages, which is what we see when we're saying using a Raisley message. So this is really like, again, highlighting the importance of communicating with your supporters through an automatic message journey of some kind. And then on the fundraising amount, the same thing. Like once a fundraiser is activated, you should change your strategy, whether that's with badges or rewards or incentives or your communications, to make sure that you are pushing people towards these things. And again, like it means you can say, okay, well, we need to prioritize matching within our campaign because we know that helps our fundraisers receive almost twice as much as what they do. We can say things like, you can tell your fundraisers, hey, if you thank your donors, you're going to receive twice as much. Like that's a really helpful little tidbit to share in your communications with your supporters. And then smaller things like photo added, but it also I think the interesting thing is here is like there is such a stark difference in matching, thanking donors, custom messages, those kinds of things to stuff like connecting your fitness app or doing other things down that you can actually prioritize it in these kinds of ways. Facebook Fundraiser is interesting. This is the first time we've had Facebook Fundraiser with this data. This is where in Australia, the UK, Canada, not New Zealand, unfortunately, or fortunately, this is where once I sign up to my peer-to-peer campaign, I'm then prompted to create a fundraiser on Facebook, which is a page on Facebook that receives donations via Facebook, so not via the fundraising platform. And we see that results in about a 30% increase in how much someone's able to raise. I think about it as a super share, because as soon as you create that fundraiser, it's shared out to your page, and Facebook gives it quite a high priority in the algorithm, which is really important. So yeah, that's probably the way to use this information, is to help you prioritize your communications with supporters. I think, are we just onto a wrap for this one, Martin?
The last thing that I wanted to note is like the other things that we've talked about today, Tom, that these things, they don't just add together, they actually multiply together. So profiles that do the right things can quickly get to 5 to 10 times the amount of fundraising as profiles that don't do those things. So profiles who haven't thanked donors, but just that these things can add together and combine together to create kind of really successful fundraising profiles.
Brilliant. So quick wrap on your peer-to-peer fundraiser strategies for 2023. Firstly, encourage your fundraisers to share their profile because it's strongly correlated with activation. Use automated messages in Raisley app to communicate and prompt fundraisers throughout your campaign. We recommend that you consider creating 2 journeys at the simplest level: an activation journey, so a series of 4 to 5 emails, which is targeted at ensuring fundraisers get their first donation. So the prompts in that can be things like share your page, create a Facebook fundraiser, donate to yourself, all of those kinds of things that we know increase the chance of activation. Then create a fundraising journey to help them hit their goals. So that can be things like mentioning a match giving period you've got set up, thanking your donors, creating a Facebook fundraiser also helps with that. Updating a photo if you haven't already, those kinds of things. Use on-page acknowledgement like rewards and badges. The reason we see an activation rate as high as it is because of those things. They're baked into Raisley. Many campaigns have them. Things like reward your top fundraisers, set up badges, set up emails that trigger when someone hits certain milestones, whether it's when they've walked 100 Ks, if that's the kind of campaign you're running, or when they've raised $500. You can set all of that up to really acknowledge and gamify your campaign. And lastly, do adopt Facebook fundraising if it's available to you. So sorry to the folks in New Zealand, but if you're in Australia, the US, Canada, the UK, adopt Facebook fundraising. It is a really simple way to increase that activation. We are at another break, which is cool. We've got a bunch of questions. We'll try to cover a few of them now. If you do need to run and get some water, we're going to take another 3 minutes, and then we're going to talk about appeals. So we've probably got another 20 minutes of stuff to go, and then we've got 20 minutes at the end for questions. In the meantime, we've been filling your heads with data, and we're talking a lot of maths and all of those kinds of things. So I thought, well, what would be a bit of fun during a break? what is the cutest dog of Raisley? So here are three of the dogs of Raisley with a nice little photo, and we want you to rate them. And we're gonna share this with the Raisley team. We'll see who wins the cutest dog of Raisley between Naga, Indy, and Stevie. All right.
People can put in the chat who they think is my dog. I won't bias the results by saying.
Yeah. Martin can't manipulate these results, but it's nice break. So far, Stevie is. I just stuffed it up, didn't I? Anyway, look, we're going to talk about some questions. Keep rating the dogs. We've got some cats to come up as well. Martin, off the top of your head, do you know which percentage of fundraisers share their page?
Oh, I think it's pretty high. It's over 50%, I think, but I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, unfortunately.
That's all good. That would have been fairly impressive if you did.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of good questions here, probably on data we don't have. So, for example, and I'll just read these out, Martin. You can tell me if you've done analysis on these. Do you have data on what the most common set donation dollar handle was?
No, I imagine it's our defaults, which as we've sort of said, we're having a bit of a look into our defaults and presentation at the moment. So I imagine that the most common people would typically maybe leave them, but we really encourage you to think hard about what's best for you, what sort of the ask is for your campaign, and customize them and make them right for you.
Our defaults are 30, 50, 100, 200, 500, I think, off the top of my head. Active donor benchmarks. Do you have any data on new donor acquisition making a second gift down the track? I don't think we've done any analysis on this yet.
No, not yet. I actually started just yesterday having a very, very quick look, but there's nothing to say.
Which probably goes to a good next question. With the donation form research, will you be releasing the data to your customers? Absolutely, we will.
Of course. That's the reason we're doing it, is so that we can give people helpful information about how to set up their donation form and make tweaks maybe to our defaults or something like that, but to help people make good decisions.
Yeah, all of the research we're doing on donation forms will either inform changes to our product to help you raise more, or we'll relay it back to you in blog posts or webinars like this one. We don't want to keep anything like that locked up. What else do we have here? Do we have any conversion rates for the sign-up form as well as conversion to donations, Martin?
Not as yet. Yeah, that stuff is still to come. Yeah,
we will share it.
Interested in it?
Yeah, we've got tracking on it, and we'll share it all. And we're also trying to bring a lot of that data into your Raisley dashboards as well. Again, I'm just kind of going on the theme of data we may have that we probably don't have. These are all really good questions. These all get recorded, so we will try to follow this up with some other analysis. But things like, do we have any stats on the success of different types of peer-to-peer campaigns, like a physical campaign versus a challenge versus an event or anything like that?
We haven't dived into that. Yeah, like as we've noted, we've got thousands of campaigns on Raisley, and so going in and classifying them is something that we're interested in and should do, but it's tricky, and it, at least in the first instance, involves someone having a look through those kind of thousands of things. So it's on our list, but hasn't got to it yet.
Yeah. Well, we should continue on. Thanks everyone for rating the dogs of Raisley. It seems like Indy is the winner on the highest number of 10s. So we'll have to tell the owner of Indy that they are the winner shortly. But hey, we also have. What? Sorry,
I said rigged. Anyway, sorry.
Rigged. Yeah, we can't verify the quality of these things. We'll do CADs later. All right, appeal campaigns. We've got 20 minutes. We're going to blaze through this. Then we've got time for a few more questions, a few photos of cats, and we'll all be on our way. All right. Appeal campaigns cover a really broad range of fundraising. So appeal campaigns are direct individual giving campaigns. These don't involve peer-to-peer. And just to be clear on the definitions again, these can include things like disaster appeals, crowdfunding, seasonal appeals like your tax and your Christmas appeal, and things like giving days, which is where you do an appeal in about a 24-hour period, often have match giving associated with them, do sometimes have a peer-to-peer element where like a company might have a page under that giving day. We've classified all of that as an appeal in this particular case because those folks are not actually doing anything for the challenge, but they just have a page to aggregate their efforts on. So that covers everything. We're really looking at these kind of appeal strategies. Usually folks run digital appeals in combination with, say, a direct mail or tele appeal. And we're looking at all of that data here. Similarly to peer-to-peer, we have some benchmarks to take you through. And then we also have some strategies on what makes a successful appeal. So we're going to dive into that, and I'm going to hand back over to Martin.
Thanks, Tom. So the first thing, as we did with peer-to-peer campaigns, the first thing we wanted to look at was appeal fundraising. And we saw it was probably a little bit more diverse in 2022 than in 2021, particularly that sort of the median appeal campaign was slightly smaller, $5,000 versus $5,400 or so. But the sort of larger appeals were actually kind of quite a bit larger. So the top 5% of appeals, they were around 53,000 versus 46,000. So those larger appeals are increasing, and that's great for us to see and encouraging. But we didn't see that sort of consistent drop that we saw with peer-to-peer campaigns on appeals. In terms of traffic, I could have shown you the same slide 3 times, but it's a very similar story in that overall drop. The traffic was steady per campaign or slightly lower, but Facebook really had the largest decrease of all traffic to appeals. And that's, it is what it is. Instagram traffic actually increased slightly. Email traffic decreased slightly. But the clearest and starkest thing was Facebook traffic decreasing. I'm moving through these quickly. Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to jump in. I had 2 observations because we've been asked a few times about these traffic classifications. In the case of appeals, I would be thinking, the director, as I said, is unclassified traffic. It's traffic we don't know the source of. I would expect in the case of an appeal, the vast majority of it is from email, just to clear that up. Actually, even if we can't technically attribute it. Web traffic is anything that's come from a referral elsewhere in the web that is not Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Google. Is that right, Martin?
Yeah.
Cool. So that's like you might link to your Raisley campaign from your website, or you might get some press about your campaign. That would all fall into web. But I really think that in terms of Facebook here, that in peer-to-peer, Facebook traffic dropped, I think, because visibility of share posts on Facebook dropped because of algorithm changes. In appeals are generally promoted through paid acquisition on Facebook. So I think the drop here is more representation that it's getting a little bit more difficult to get a lot of traffic through your paid Facebook campaigns last year. And we obviously need to keep an eye on this year more than organic social effects here. So it's a similar graph, but I think a different driving force behind it.
Yeah, and I guess just with, as you've kind of noted, Tom, like we've done our best to kind of classify this traffic, but we get lots of traffic from lots of different sources, and putting it all into kind of a consistent box is tricky. So we've done our best, but and also different campaigns have very different distributions of where they get their traffic from, and some might use email, some might not use email, and those kind of things. So each campaign is different. And so here we're just showing the kind of middle campaign, but I think the error bars on these are really, really wide, which is probably why they couldn't quite fit on the slide sort of thing. So they're giving us a sense of what's happening in the middle. The next thing to think about and look at was conversion rates for appeals. And we saw a similar thing as we saw for fundraising, in that some conversion rates increased. So some appeals are kind of getting sort of 30% conversion rates for new users visiting their appeal, but also the kind of median and the bottom 25% dropped a little bit. So there's sort of a widening spread of appeal conversion rates. But the thing that we really wanted to highlight in terms of conversion rates for appeals is just the importance of email traffic. So traffic that we've been able to attribute to email, we're seeing kind of the median conversion rate there is around 35%, which is a pretty high conversion rate for one source of traffic. And Facebook traffic, I mean, some of that is probably in that direct group, but Facebook traffic that we've been able to attribute, that's down around 4%. So Facebook traffic, organic shares, and that kind of thing isn't really going to drive fundraising for your appeal campaign. Things like emailing people you know who have supported you in the past or have provided their email through another channel, that's really going to drive the highest kind of qualified traffic for your appeal campaign. Was there anything you wanted to add in terms of conversion rates, Tom?
Just that 2022 user conversion rate, the bars there represent the top of it is the top 25%, the bottom is the bottom 25%. There is so much room for you to improve your conversion rate. Like you can place yourself on that bar based on the data that you've got, but yeah, we see some campaigns appeals run that get that conversion rate up to 30, 35%. And that's pretty remarkable and so much room to grow.
Donation amounts. So much like, well, actually slightly differently to peer-to-peers, but donation amounts for appeals, the most common amount remains steady at $50. The median amount edged slightly higher. So that's, just over $2 higher to $35. And the average amount increased kind of quite substantially, more than kind of 10%. So appeal amounts were moving higher. I think Tom made the point earlier that there's a little bit of virtual peer-to-peer fatigue, and maybe some of that shifted to the appeal space where we sort of saw not necessarily growth in overall campaign size, but people were making larger donations there, is what the message is from here. This is very similar to the slide that I showed around peer-to-peer fundraising, but it's really accentuated in appeal campaigns. So fundraising of dollars amounts above 250, which again is shown in the orange, that represented around 6% of transactions to appeals campaigns. But those 6% of transactions represented more than half of fundraising. And we do get some really, really big donations through Raisley, but most of these donations aren't massive donations, but they're just sort of larger. So they're somewhat larger than 250, maybe 500, 1,000, a few thousand. But that makes up more than half of fundraising. Whereas if you look at donation amounts under 50, that's 61% of transactions, but only 14% of fundraising. So just something sort of, I think, to keep in mind and consider is how can we maximize or encourage people to give that larger donation amount, maybe creating a journey, an email journey for someone who's given you a larger donation amount in the past, encouraging them to give again, or just nuancing your comms a little bit to make that a reasonable proposition of someone giving you a large amount, putting a label on a donation amount of what that larger amount can do. And also at the same time, maximizing the value of those donations under 50. So if that's making sure there's one handle and that's at the larger end, that might make that 61% of transactions sort of a larger chunk of your fundraising. The last sort of benchmark that we wanted to provide for appeals is that they typically last for around 8 weeks, but that, this is the week since the campaigns released their first dollar. But there's sort of really two periods. The first 4 weeks is where 75% of the fundraising is. And then the last 4 weeks is where the last 25% comes in. So they're going to move quite quickly. And of course we see appeals that happen for a giving day in 1 day or that kind of thing, but they do happen quite quickly. And the shaded region here is just the top 25% and bottom 25% to give you a sense, but it's pretty closely aligned around that kind of period.
Just goes to show really here that the velocity of your appeal is really important and that you're going to be raising most of that money that you raise in that first 3 weeks. So just try to factor that into your planning, that you can't stretch them out too long, but also it means that you can run lots a year because there's 12 months in a year, not suggesting you run 12 appeals, but you can certainly run more than 2. All right, some appeal takeaways. So appeal fundraising was similar in 2021 and 2022. We didn't see the same kind of slight decline that we saw in peer-to-peer. Conversion rate appeals dipped very slightly, but really not to a meaningful level. Email traffic has a very high conversion rate, around 34%, but let's combine that with direct. So it's really about 1 in 4 people who visit your appeal page on Raisely. Certainly this is just Raisely data, but 1 in 4 people who visit your appeal page are going to give. But we do see lower conversion rates on things like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, those social sources. That's really interesting. It's kind of to be expected. They're cold audiences generally. Certainly the vast majority of traffic would be cold audiences. And sometimes when you're going out to an audience on Facebook, what your aim is to acquire a donor. So it's okay if you cover your costs, for example, and you don't earn too much on that, because you want to make sure you can ask that good donor to give again and again, and they might be a future supporter of your charity. And then just like peer-to-peer, more than 50% of appeal fundraising was from donations above 250 AED. So really those major donors are such an important part of your appeals. It's good to push dollar handles higher. More and more we're talking to charities about pearls and personalization. It's very easy to customize your donation form and your dollar amounts to be customized based on someone's last gift. If you're sending out an email from Raisely or from another platform, if you need hands doing that, just contact our support team. But those kinds of customizations can really increase your average donation. And of course, it's been really good to see that average donations have increased quite a bit in 2022. We're coming right to the end, and I just thought to give us one last boost of energy, I'm launching How Cute Are the Cats of Raisely? Final poll as we talk through things. 3 cats loved by Raisely team members. You can tell us who you think is the cutest and not. Or just that they're all very cute, while Martin talks us through our appeal recommendations of 2023, which is the last section we've got for today.
I'll jump into this while people are voting Tom. And I guess, so just to note, some of this information that's coming up is kind of quite similar to stuff that we saw for organizations as a whole. And so it kind of serves 2 purposes: things to think about for your appeal campaign specifically, but also important reminders of things that you can do as an organization across your organization as well. And so this is the last regression that we ran as part of putting together these benchmarks. So we're putting all of the data from all of our appeal campaigns and controlling for the organization, and looking at 4 different factors that we think are associated with higher fundraising for appeal campaigns. And these are things that you might consider as part of that. So the 4 things are using matched giving, using custom Raisely messages, using regular giving. And the last thing is not something that we encourage you to do, but it's something that we looked at, and that's just the number of required fields on your donation form. And so just thinking about only asking for the information that you need. But you can see there that things like match giving have a huge impact on appeal fundraising. So they're typically appeals that use match giving are 3.2 times as large. So over a 200% increase using Raisely messages, using Raisely regular giving. They're doubling the amount of fundraising that we typically see for an appeal fundraiser. The first one, again, quite similar to what we see at an organization level, but appeal campaigns that use donation matching, when you actually look at just the median, that's 4 times as large. But when you kind of control for other factors, that normalizes to around 3.2 times. But again, partnering with a large a company or a wealthy donor, a corporate partner, to match during a period of your appeal, whether it's for a giving day or for another time, can be a great way to increase fundraising for that appeal and give that impetus for someone to give. So they see, hey, if I give now, I'm not just giving $50, I'm really giving $100 or $150. That's going to have a huge impact for that organization. It really kind of creates an impetus for those to give. And I think around 8% of appeal campaigns use donation matching, and we'd love to see that get higher, because it's like, again, it's the biggest thing that we've found. And I guess just personally, someone asked me, what's the impact of like donation matching? And I sort of had to look at the data in a bunch of different ways to check that, no, it's actually like what we see there, because it is such a big impact. The last one, regular giving. So regular giving regular donors typically give 3 times the amount, and that's even higher, sort of larger for particularly appeals campaigns, and campaigns that take advantage of regular giving tend to raise 2 times the amount. And I guess particularly around appeals, which it's more common to use regular giving, I think, for an appeal, you might put together a specific appeal that's centered around regular giving. So inviting people to become, I think one of the ones was like I got an email last week from an organization asking me to become part of their circle of care. And it was a very powerful and sort of moving ask from them to become a regular giver. And so having a specific appeal campaign that's designed around regular giving can really boost that source of revenue and give you a stable source of revenue that's going to be more consistent than just one-off gifts throughout the year. I'm moving quickly. Tom, is there anything you wanted to add on that?
No, keep racing by.
The last one, where we again saw something similar, but like Raisley messages really can drive qualified message traffic to your appeal. And that might be from another messenger source. We can only really look at the moment at data from our messages platform. But that's going to be your most qualified source of traffic, as we saw like email conversion rates are up around 35%. And so using a tool like messages to communicate with your donor, tell them about your appeal and invite them to give, that's where the heart of appeal campaigns is going to be, more so than sharing it from your Facebook page, which is going to struggle to get traffic and or Facebook paid ads. As Tom said, it can be a great source of kind of donor acquisition, but might not be a huge source of new fundraising. And the last factor that we looked at, which was we wanted to see whether forms that have a large number of required fields actually are associated with reduced fundraising for a campaign. And we didn't see that. And my colleagues at Raisley have been very clear with me that I need to be very careful and say that the key message here is really only request the data you need. An appeal, you've got a few moments of people moving through your form, and you want to make it as easy as possible for people to move through that form. And as we said, we're going to be doing some work on donation forms and researching what really drives conversion rate, which is probably the better comparison here rather than campaign fundraising, seeing which of these two options converts better rather than is associated with fundraising. And so, yeah, we're going to do that work, but we just wanted to encourage you, when you think about your donation form, think about, do I need this piece of information? It's good for data privacy, just to limit what you're collecting, so that you only have what you need, but also makes it easier for people to move through your form and to give. If 2022 was anything, it was perhaps the year of the data leak. Absolutely. So just be conscious of the information you're putting together.
Always be careful with the information you're collecting, but it is very interesting to see that it doesn't have a big impact on fundraising. Certainly it seems here on our data, it has a positive impact on fundraising. There might be a little bit of correlation, not causation happening here. But it is certainly interesting to see, and something we're going to be looking into a little bit more in more detail. I think that gives us a wrap on appeals. So those top appeal strategies for 2023, use matched giving to amplify those key moments of your appeal. I think it's true to say, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Martin, but it's not the amount of matched giving that matters. It's just the fact that you have matched giving. So even a small matched giving pool can generate the excitement and momentum that you need for your campaign. When we've looked at this, we haven't found like a meaningful difference between the size of a matched giving pool versus the impact of that matched giving pool. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's just really like any transactions that were matched. Yeah. So it's,
really is a big moment. Inviting donors to give regularly and consider running a regular giving appeal is really important. Making sure you have a good, robust online regular giving program is a really key strategy for 2023. It gives you that bedrock of revenue that you can do to run your operations and do the change that you want to see in the world. Of course, the really interesting thing here is that even an appeal where you typically wouldn't ask for regular donations, just inviting people to do it can really increase the amount you raise for that appeal. And that's because even if a small percentage of supporters do decide in that appeal to give regularly, their donations are so large over the course of the year that we see that impact on your campaign that we showed in those slides. So Raisley has it on by default that you ask for monthly donations. We'd recommend keeping that there just to raise that a little bit more. But of course, then also email traffic is the most qualified source. We know that for appeals, but making sure that you're sending those messages out to folks can really have an impact on how much you raise in that campaign. Again, it was about 11 to 20. We'd expect that there's some filtering in there. So you might have different messages going to different audiences, say your new donors or your regular donors or your big donors and your small donors, and those kind of categorizations that you'd be making within your organization. So important to split those up. That is a wrap for our benchmarks today. And congratulations to Lottie and Evie, the two cats who won our last poll as having the most 10s. So we'll let the owners of those cats know as well that's what you think. Super exciting. I have one last poll for you. It's not cats. It's a little bit more serious while we just run through the last of it. So I'm really keen to know, we're going to go into questions in a second, but so keen to know how you found this webinar. There's a longer feedback poll at the end of the session, but broadly, I would just love to know if you'd recommend this webinar to a colleague. We'd love to know how you found it. Now, while we answer that, I think we've got a bit of a wrap. We're going to continue on. There we go. Want to go to the next slide button. We have some key benchmarks. We've put these on a page for you. I'm not going to read them all out, but we will be sending these as an email for you. So we've got these kind of key benchmarks on a page. You can print them out, stick them up in your office, do all of those kinds of things. We've got those key benchmarks for organizations, peer-to-peer and appeals, but we've also got some key recommendations for you that are really just to summarize everything that we've taken you through today. And that's just on the next slide as well. So there are things like top tips for your organization, top tips for your peer-to-peer campaign, and top tips for your appeal. Of course, a lot of the strategies that we've suggested today are things that we empower organizations to do on Raisley. I would just really encourage you to reach out to us, and if there's anything that we can do to help with your fundraising, our whole team's here to help. Particularly if it's launching a new campaign or updating your campaign, we can do things like design reviews of your campaigns or even help you build them. So always just reach out if there's anything that you need a hand with for your campaign, from optimization to reviews to strategy. Our whole team's here to help across the platform. And of course, the advantage of using an all-in-one platform like Raisley is that you can see all of these insights all in the one place. All this data in the one place, and you can duplicate your campaigns, you can have templates, you can see all these messages, all of these things are all in the one place, and allows you to get more and more sophisticated with all of your digital fundraising. We've got 15 minutes. No, it's been a longer session, but yeah, we've got some time for questions. There's a bunch in the Q&A. Feel free to pop anything else in the Q&A. We'll try to cover as much as we can. If you do need to log off now, that's totally fine. Thanks for joining us, but we'll stay on for the 15 minutes for questions. If you do want to ask your question verbally, totally open to hearing some voices that are not Martin and mine. So just raise your hand and I can unmute you or give you kind of the speaking stick. So yeah, if you want to ask your question verbally, raise your hand. The button's down the bottom. Got a few quick questions though that have come through the Q&A. Again, these probably relate to data that we may not have, but I'm going to give it a crack. Would love to know if you have any specific data on end of year appeals and Christmas appeals. Very interested in performance across the industry during this time. Martin, I don't think you've looked into anything. I can certainly speak anecdotally.
Yeah, I don't have anything. We can definitely have a look at it. Yeah.
What we saw this year is that in Australia and New Zealand, Giving Tuesday was something like 150% bigger than it was last year. So there was quite a bit of growth on Giving Tuesday. That's at the end of November, so it was quite a late campaign. And we also saw reasonable performance with Christmas campaigns, but it was a bit hit and miss. There were some organizations that really struggled and some organizations actually knocked it out of the park. And I think it depends on how that kind of year-end calendar is looking like in terms of those peer-to-peer, and sorry, those appeal campaigns, getting the terminology all mixed up. So hopefully that helps, but we can certainly look into it a little bit more. Marriage has asked, do you have any numbers on appeal fundraising through organic versus paid? We are unsure whether we should try paid advertising for the first time. We do not have a lot of resources available to this.
And the little look that I had was the data that we had. Yeah, like I don't want to speak because it was just a preliminary look too much, but the data that we did see, the sort of conversion rates for paid traffic, particularly like social paid traffic, were pretty low. So sort of, yeah, not worth considering low, but that's not to say what you should do for your organization. Yeah, a hard thing for us to look at to kind of classify that paid and unpaid.
It's a tricky one. Certainly, like we've seen that conversion rate of 4% for Facebook as a benchmark is pretty low. I don't know. Maybe this is one that the audience who's still here can ask. If you've tried a campaign for acquisition only and you've used Facebook and it's worked or hasn't worked, maybe you can pop that in the chat and we can see if we can help out even more. Luke has asked about prizes and gamification with gifts and incentive rewards for sign-up and top fundraiser profiles. I think it's fair to say that in the data, we don't have a sense of how much gamification helps because it's kind of hard to distill, say, someone receiving a badge from them doing the thing that caused them to receive the badge. Is that fair to say, Martin? Or do you have more here?
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you get a badge for extra fundraising, there's gonna be an association between badges and extra fundraising, and whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do see it there, of course, in that graph that we've got 1.1 times, so about 10% increase. Certainly, like we released a new peer-to-peer template back in 2020, and that peer-to-peer template increased the gamification and also made things like our mobile app, the dashboard behave more like a mobile app. And we found that when we increased that template, released that template, that activation went up pretty substantially. It was something by 15 points. So I think gamification is really important. We've also seen some campaigns out in the industry, both on Raisely and not on Raisely, where you're doing things like rewards and incentives for those really top fundraisers, whether you're putting them in a club or you're giving them a really high value reward. And we can see that really work. So I think it's fair to say that it definitely works, but and maybe, again, this is a thing that in the chat, if you've had particular success with gamification, you can share your tips and your strategies. But it's hard to put hard and strict numbers to. All right. If there's any other, we've got a hand. That'd be good because that'll give me a moment to sort through some of these questions. Luke, if you want to ask your question.
Hey, Tom, thank you for all these webinars that you do. They're really helpful to study through. One of the questions that are often coming to me, and I work with a bunch of different organizations as a consultant, is about the donor retention. And that I know that you kind of said you don't have data, but is there any way that there's some insights that we can get as far as an understanding in a short period of time? Is there anything that you can lead us to as to some data that might be soothing for some of our clients who think that basically it's a flash in the pan and unsustainable, which of course we believe is not true?
And that's particularly in relation to acquisition and social acquisition.
Yeah, mostly about the acquired donors, because they see it, their experience is someone's going for a venture walk and it's just they've given to a friend, but they don't care about the organization, so they go, well, so it's unsustainable growth. But obviously there's a whole experience anecdotally from my own campaigns that I've got, but I just wondered whether there was more system-wide places I can go find data.
Well, like we've got that data, Luke. It's it's just we haven't looked at it in that way, and so that's like just something for us to take away. And I think like particularly for peer-to-peer campaigns, looking at the difference between of retention for donors to peer-to-peer campaigns compared with other campaigns, that would be really interesting and provide a pretty clear answer to that in terms of people coming to a peer-to-peer campaign coming back again compared to other appeals and that kind of thing. Yeah, it's something we can do and get back to you.
Yeah, it's a good note for us to take away. I think what I've heard from folks is that it's really hard to convert a peer-to-peer donor to an organizational donor. Like that's hard and your percentages are low. It's a bit easier to convert a peer-to-peer donor to a peer-to-peer supporter in a future campaign. Seen a bit more success with that. But yeah, let's run the numbers and see what we can find. We'll get back to you.
Thanks heaps.
All right, Tim has asked, what sort of impact does end of financial year have on fundraising and donor activity? Again, I don't think it's one that we've analysed specifically, but we do know, of course, from looking at our seasonality of fundraising across Raisley, that end of financial year fundraising, whether that's in Australia being June, whether that's in New Zealand being March, I believe, does have a really big impact. So certainly a huge amount of fundraising happens in that time period, disproportionate to the rest of the year. But that's particularly for appeals, of course, not peer-to-peer campaigns. Ingrid's asked if we can talk about how offline activities such as postal, direct mails, face-to-face fundraising and SMS can impact on online giving. It is such a good question. I'd throw this out to the audience as well. Like if you've got experience in how your offline activity has impacted your online giving, please pop it in the chat because that would be so interesting for everyone to hear. One of the challenges we have is we just can't see that. So we can only see the data that happens online and happens on platform. And we'd love to help out with a broader benchmarking exercise where we do get a little bit more of that kind of insight. Anecdotally, again, we do know that like we've had more and more charities putting QR codes on their direct mails that link to a personalized appeal page. And we've heard that sometimes that QR code can really help with activation. Certainly can help increase your average donation for that appeal online. Quite easy to set up. Do just let us know if you need a hand doing that. But we've certainly seen that as a strategy that's emerging. Now everyone knows how to use QR codes. You would have noticed we put a few of them in the slides today. But in terms of face-to-face and SMS, it's difficult to say. We do see people using SMS really well in relation to match giving periods. So for example, if we've got a match giving period starting at midday today, then we probably want to send an SMS half an hour beforehand. We know that that's going to get like a 98% open rate. People are going to grab it and jump onto it. So SMS can be really effective in that way. But yeah, if anyone's got any harder data, that would be awesome. Yeah, just pop it in the chat. There's a few questions about our roadmap. So things like, does Raisley plan on expanding measurement and reporting functionality for your messages function? We absolutely are. We've got some wireframes of some incredible reports that show you things like amount raised per message that you send, open rates, click rates, bounce rates, the impact of those messages on your campaigns. They're all wireframed out, part of our product development process, and will be coming this year, which is really exciting. Neil's asked if there are specific types of charities that are doing better in fundraising, i.e. animals, food, homelessness, etc. Hard to say. Certainly when we've looked at our data, we don't classify charities based on issue in our data, so we don't really know. Certainly like things are tied to the world that's going around. So as there's a need for a service, there's generally more public visibility into a service, and that ends up being a tailwind for your fundraising efforts. And that, of course, changes over time, but I don't think there's a broad answer. And if you have any questions and you want to ask, just pop up your hand. I'm just going to have a quick look through these ones. Martin, Katrina's asked if we have the average figures for each of these metrics. I think it was in relation to things like profile totals. If we have the average amount that is a profile total as opposed to the median.
Yeah, I can get it out and find it. Yeah.
Totally fine that you don't know that off the top of your head.
I don't know it off the top of my head. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. And have we seen blogs at all in the data having an impact on amounts that have been raised?
That was when we dropped out this year, and I think, yeah, I can't comment on that one. It's something I'll have to check.
Another good question.
It's not a hugely utilized thing, I think, blogs.
Yeah, perhaps we took it out because the data was a bit too noisy there.
Mm.
Oh, good. this is probably a good clarification. It's got 2 thumbs up, so let's just confirm it. I think this was in relation to the peer-to-peer fundraising data. Could you please confirm, do you mean that if someone is a regular giver, they are likely to fundraise 2.1x more than other peer-to-peer participants, or are other peer-to-peer participants 2.1x more likely to become regular givers? It's a bit of a tongue twister, but I think going back to that peer-to-peer graph and the impact of regular giving.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
What can you see?
Nothing.
Anything?
You stop
Oh,
sharing
sorry.
screen. Yeah.
No, I pressed back on my browser, and so I put
I think from memory, it was.
Yeah,
if
I
you
can.
offer,
Yeah.
just answer.
Oh, so the answer is so if your profile receives fundraising, receives funding from a regular giver, your total is expected to be 2.1 times someone who didn't receive fundraising from a regular giver. So it's more about the donations you receive than the individual being a regular giver or not. It's if you received a donation from someone who was a regular giver, the total of that profile is expected to be twice as big as someone who didn't receive any fundraising from a regular giver.
Thanks. Hopefully that answers your question, DC. We probably have time for one more, and then we can wrap it up. Angela's asked, why is the activation rate higher in 2022, but the average donations in 2022 is lower? And I think that the answer to this is that these are very different stats. So the activation rate is, do I raise $1 or more? And then the amount raised is kind of how much I get towards my goal. Is that fair to say, Martin?
Absolutely, that's right, Tom.
And so the why is a bit of a question, but I think our thesis here is that the visibility of campaigns, or the ability for a supporter to share and promote their peer-to-peer campaign, was a little harder in 2022 than it was in 2021. And so generally we see peer-to-peer fundraisers getting slightly less donations because there is slightly less traffic. And of course, there's quite a 25% drop in Facebook traffic from Facebook as well. I think we can wrap it up there. Loads of good questions. Plenty we couldn't answer. I might do, there's some quick ones. Someone asked earlier in the chat whether SMS through Raisely was available in NZ. Unfortunately, SMS is not available in NZ through Raisely. It's a bit of a limitation of NZ telco providers. It is something that we're looking into. It is available in Australia. I think that is all. Well, look, there's so many there, but I think we can wrap it up there. Thank you everyone so much for joining this session. Coming along, I know it's been a longer one. Appreciate you participating, asking all the questions, and as always, appreciate your partnership and working with Raisely, whether you do it at the moment or whether you might in the future. So, and thanks for everything you do to fundraise for the well-being of people and planet. We really couldn't do this without you, and you all make the world such a better place. So we're so proud to work with you. So thank you so much, everyone, and
thanks,
everyone. Good luck with your campaigns. Thanks, Martin, for all of the hours and weeks of time that have gone into preparing this data for today. It's been such a hustle and done such a great job of it. All right, we'll see you on the next webinar, everyone. Thanks.
See you soon. Bye.